Good morning. Welcome. I'm Ellen Horseman with Camden, Arkansas's First United Methodist Church. Our Sunday school lesson today will be Psalm 31. It's a psalm I deliberately picked as I'm filling in a little bit here before we get to Lent. And then, as I said, I deliberately picked it because it does have a quotation in it that Jesus will use on the cross. Well, I get to studying it this week and I began to think, picking this was not such a good idea. It's a fun psalm to read. It's got some beautiful poetry in it, but it's really difficult to organize into a lesson. I did find out I was in some pretty good company though, since it seemed like none of the commentators that I read could agree on how to divide this poem, and every time I picked up one, it was a different division. I finally read a fellow that said, there's no logical way to organize this psalm. And I said, well, thank you, because that's the way it had struck me. It seems like Psalm 31 alternates between petition and trust. Or maybe a better way to say that is that it alternates between an almost desperate begging and complete trust. It's it's back and forth, vacillating. Really, you read it and there's times when you're reading it, you want to say, okay, psalmist, has God delivered you or not? Do you trust God or do you not trust God? But maybe that is typical of our life and of our journey with God. Faith and our walk with God is not a straight line. We don't just one day say, oh, I've given myself to the Lord, and from then on out, it's all easy peasy, easy going, wonderful relationship with God for the rest of our life. We swing back and forth. We swing back and forth between completely trusting God and not trusting in God at all, between completely feeling God's presence and wondering if God is there. We have times of closeness and times of great doubt. We have times of well-being and times of great danger. So maybe that's one reason we could like this psalm, is because it does seem kind of back and forth. I think sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that if they give their life to God, well, then they should not feel any stress or suffering. They might think they won't have any stress or suffering, or if they have suffering, if they have stress, they might feel like, I'm not supposed to feel this way. Well, you know what? Someone should have given that memo to Jesus, because he certainly had times of stress. He certainly had times of suffering. And yes, at least we see on the cross, he had times of feeling very stressed out about it. Stressed out about stress. That could be redundant. Not only do faithful people suffer, as Jesus did, and faithful people suffer as all people suffer, but sometimes faithful people suffer because of their faithfulness. Jesus suffered because he spoke the truth. And a pastor who speaks the truth in love, who pushes the congregation, who tries to get us, who speaks a prophetic word, which means a true word, and tries to get us to take a hard look at ourselves, that pastor can sometimes be very unpopular or be subject to a lot of criticism. Why would you and I expect not to encounter any difficulty when people like Jesus did? Well, I suppose I better get on reading this poem. And I'm going to tell you that as I studied it this week, I actually I made myself a little sheet where I had the CEB on one column and the NRSV on the other, because looking at the double translations really helps. But enough talking. Let me read. I'm going to start with the first 8 verses. Okay, listen to the poet here. I take refuge in you, Lord. Please never let me be put to shame. Rescue me by your righteousness. Listen closely to me. Deliver me quickly. Be a rock that protects me. Be a strong fortress that saves me. You are definitely my rock and my fortress. Guide me and lead me for the sake of your good name. Whoops. Get me out of this net that's been set for me, because you are my protective fortress. I entrust my spirit into your hands. You, Lord God of faithfulness, you have saved me. I hate those who embrace what is completely worthless, and I myself trust the Lord. I rejoice and celebrate in your faithful love because you saw my suffering. You were intimately acquainted with my deep distress. You didn't hand me over to the enemy, but set my feet in wide open spaces. Now, if you were listening and not watching, well, actually, even if you were watching, you heard a big bang, I just knocked a bunch of stuff over. No worries. But let me get back to the poem. Over and over in these first 8 verses, you hear this person really expressing a lot of trust, talking about God as a place of safety. He uses words like refuge, fortress, rock. Think about it when you say, God, you are my rock. Of course, we don't think of a little rock like you can cast at someone, but a big place that you can hide behind, that you can feel secure. A fortress, a mighty fortress, uses the word fortress, a protective fortress over and over, a place of strength. All images of God as a protective force. And I can't help but wonder when I'm reading that, is he trying to convince himself of that, or is he trying to remind himself, perhaps, of how God has been a fortress in the past? Because in the middle of all this, talking about how you're my refuge, you're my strength, you're my strong fortress, he's using all these verbs begging for rescue. He says, God, save me, deliver me, rescue me. But then in verse 5, we have what I call an assertion of complete trust. In the CEB, he says it this way: I entrust my spirit into your hands. Or in the NRSV, he says, and this will sound more familiar, into your hand I commit my spirit. Now that sounds like a lot of trust. And in case we haven't caught on that he's trusting him, he will go on to say in verse 6, I myself trust the Lord. So we see these assertions of trust and this talking about God as a rock and a refuge. And as I said, this wonderful quotation, into your hands I commit my spirit, or I entrust my spirit into your hands, as it says in the CEB. And of course, you recognize that into your hands I commit my spirit as what Jesus says on the cross in Luke. I'm pretty sure it's his last words. Well, Professor Clinton McCannon says that this is the poet's most emphatic expression of trust all through this poem. He says that the Hebrew word for spirit that was used here, into your hands I commit my spirit, that word means breath and is often an analogy for life. And so McCann says that the psalmist says, in effect, I put my life into your hands. Well, I can't think of a more deep expression of trust, my friends, than to say to God or to anything, I put my life in your hands. And this trust in God here is contrasted with those in verse 6 that the poet says, I hate those who embrace what is completely worthless. Or let me give you, that's the CEB, and the NRSV, it says you hate, but McCann says it really should be I hate. So let's say I hate. I hate those who pay regard to worthless idols. So in other words, the poet is saying, I put my trust in you, God, not trusting like other people do in that which is completely worthless, or those which are vain idols. So you know what that does? To me, this quotation calls us to ask ourselves, what do I really trust in? Now, I mean, I know we're very apt to give what I call the Sunday school answer. Well, I trust in God. But what do I really trust in? When things get difficult, what do or who do I really trust in? What do I really trust in? On a day-to-day basis, how do I live my life and how do I spend my time? And what does that show about what I trust in? Do I trust in God, or do I trust in these worthless idols? Do I trust in vain vanities, I think one other translation says, or that which is completely worthless, like money and fame and prestige and comfort and, well, you get the idea. Let's see, verses 7 and 8, I'm sorry, at the end of this little part that I read, kind of makes it sound like the poet has been delivered from whatever it was that's bothering him, because he said, I rejoice and celebrate your faithful love because you saw my suffering. You didn't hand me over to the enemy, but set my feet in wide open spaces, or you have put my feet on broad spaces, says another translation, meaning you've got me far away from the cliff. I'm not about to fall off. I'm in a wide space. And by the way, that word, according to Professor McCann, that word that's used for broad places here, that phrase, is also used in Exodus in talking about the promised land. So God seems to have delivered the poet. You've delivered me. I'm in the broad places. I trusted you and you didn't let me down. And then immediately in the verses that follow, we turn on to a lot more trouble and a lot of begging of God. Listen to verses 9 through 13 and hear how all these troubles just seem to pile up. Let's see, he says, have mercy on me, O Lord, because I'm depressed. My vision fails because of my grief, as do my spirit and my body. My life is consumed with sadness. My years are consumed with groaning. Strength fails me because of my suffering. My bones are dried up. I'm a joke to all my enemies, still worse to my neighbors. I scare my friends, and whoever sees me in the street runs away. I am forgotten like I'm dead, completely out of mind. I am like a piece of broken pottery, completely destroyed. Yes, I've heard all the gossiping, terror all around. So many gang up together against me. They plan to take my life. Now, like I said, it sounded like in verse 8 that the troubles were over with, and now this guy's in a bad way, isn't he? He talks about being in deep distress, which I would see as maybe depression. He talks about all this grief. He talks about, I'm depressed. My vision fails because of grief. He's so much in grief that his spirit, his body is wasting away. This guy's got bad troubles. He's consumed by sadness. His years are consumed with groaning. His bones are drying up. I mean, this guy is in a bad way. And he says, I've become a joke to all my enemies. And if that's not bad enough, this is even worse. Even his friends are abandoning him. This translation, the CEB, says, I scare my friends. Whoever sees me in the street runs away. Let's hop over to the NRSV and see what it says. What verse is that? 11. I'm a scorn to all my adversaries, a horror to my neighbors, an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me. Wow, why are his friends fleeing from him? I can't decide. Is it because he looks so bad? Is it because he's so death-like that it scares them? Or is it because they don't want to deal with whatever he's dealing with? I want to tell you something, friends. We can be that way sometimes. You know, when we grieve, how we long for someone to just listen. That's what the psalmist, by the way, asked God at the very beginning of this poem. He says, oh, fiddle, I thought he said, listen to me. Listen to me, Lord. Yeah, verse 2, listen closely to me. We long for someone to listen to us when we're in grief, when we're in agony. And I will tell you that when someone loses a loved one, most of us rally around and we want to listen to them at first, briefly, during the time as they're preparing for and as they go through the funeral. But sorry, but sometimes when that funeral is over with, a lot of people are done with that. They don't want to hear about it anymore. It makes them uncomfortable if you seem to still be grieving. They'll ask you, how are you doing? And you're expected to say, oh, I'm doing fine. Because we're so good about helping right at the moment, but we're uncomfortable in our culture. We're very uncomfortable talking about death, and we're uncomfortable when we can see that grief goes on. That's why a lot of times when a person is widowed, we soon find that people are trying to fix them up with somebody. C.S. Lewis wrote about that in a book he wrote after his wife died. He called it A Grief Observed. And he wrote about those feelings of abandonment. Here's one of the things he says, and it sounds a lot like the psalmist here who says his friends run away from him, they turn away from him. This is what Lewis said. An odd byproduct of my loss is that I am aware of being an embarrassment to everyone I meet. At work, at the club, in the street, I see people as they approach me trying to make up their minds whether they'll say something about it or not. I hate it if they do or if they don't. Some people avoid me altogether. So that's what the psalmist is dealing with. And if that's not bad enough, he says that there's a bunch of gossiping going on. People are conspiring against his very life. So many gang up together against me. They plan to take my life. So he's got a lot of enemies. Things are bad, bad, bad. And so what's he going to do? He'll move on again to another expression of trust, but you'll watch this. I'm going to read verses 14 through 18 and watch how this goes from trust to prayer for help, to trust to prayer for help. Well, read it, Ellen. But me, that's after he's told this long litany of troubles. The poet says, but me, I trust you, Lord. I affirm you are my God. My future is in your hands. Don't hand me over to my enemies, to all who are out to get me. Shine your face on your servant. Save me by your faithful love. Lord, don't let me be put to shame because I have cried out to you. Let the wicked be put to shame. Let them be silenced in death's dominion. Let their lying lips be shut up whenever they speak arrogantly against the righteous with pride and contempt. So the poet is saying that I've lost my train of thought here. Let me see if I can catch it. I'm committing my spirit to you. I'm entrusting to you. And I love this in verse 15. My future is in your hands. A more typical translation of that is the one in the NRSV. My times are in your hand. So my times are in your hand, or my future is in your hand. The poet is basically saying that in spite of everything, in spite of all these things that people have been doing to me, in spite of all this grieving, in spite of people ignoring me, in spite of people actually conspiring against me, I am going to commit my spirit. I'm going to entrust my life to you, O God. I'm going to trust you, and I'm not going to worry about my enemies. I'm going to trust you because you're what counts, not my enemies, and not these things that are completely worthless that he mentioned up above. The poet asks that those who are wicked, those who trust in worthless things, he'll ask near the end of what I read to you, that they be silenced. Let the wicked be put to shame. Let them be silenced, he says. Let their lying lips be shut up. He wants all that clamoring for the things of this world to be silenced. And in contrast to that, let me say this. He wants them to be silenced. He asked for them to be silenced. He asked for their lying lips to be shut up. And so I'm hearing him say here that I'm not going to listen to the siren songs of the world. I'm not going to give in to all the pressure from my peers, to all the pressure from society, to all the pressure from materialism, to all the pressure from worldly power, from the things of this world. Let that be silent. And in contrast to the silencing of the worldly and the ungodly, the poet is now going to burst forth in praise and call others to do the same. So let's read the rest of this psalm, going now from verses 19 through 24. How great is the goodness that you've reserved for those who honor you, that you commit to those who take refuge in you in the sight of everyone. You hide them in the shelter of your wings, safe from human scheming. You conceal them in a shelter safe from accusing tongues. Bless the Lord, because he has wondrously revealed his faithful love to me. when I was like a city under siege. When I was panicked, I said, I'm cut off from your eyes. But you heard my request for mercy when I cried out to you for help. All you who are faithful love the Lord. The Lord protects those who are loyal, but he pays the proud back to the fullest degree. All you who wait for the Lord, be strong and let your heart take courage. So once again in this section, the poet refers to God as a refuge, as a shelter. He talks about hiding in the shelter of your wings. So God is a shelter, a rock, a place of safety, away from human scheming, away from what he calls accusing tongues. You hide them, he says, from human scheming. You conceal them from accusing tongues. God is a place of shelter away from troubles. God is a place of shelter away from all those pressures of the world that pull us in so many directions. The poet asserts that even when I felt besieged, when I felt like a city under siege, when I felt deserted, when I felt cut off from you, when I felt like that your eyes were no longer upon me, I'm cut off from you, he says, you heard my request for mercy. You did not abandon me. You heard my request for mercy when I cried out to you for help. Yes, that's it. Ultimately, what this psalmist has come to believe is that we should trust in God. And that's why he burst forth saying, all you who are faithful love the Lord. The Lord protects. All you who wait for the Lord, be strong and take courage. Yes, there are things that are going to challenge our trust in God, sometimes on a daily basis. But ultimately, this psalm is a challenge to us to consider, what do I really trust? As I said, we might quickly say on what I call the Sunday school answer, oh, I trust God, I trust God. But do I live like I really trust God? How do I spend my time? Do I spend my time like I really trust God, like I want to follow God's way? How do I spend my money? How do I spend my energy? What do I spend time desiring? How I do these things tells me a lot about what I really trust. Where do I look for happiness or peace or rest? Because friends, many of the things that we strive for in order to have happiness, in order to have peace, things like money and power and prestige and comfort, none of these things can really ever give us peace. Here's my question. Are you ready to commit your life to God? To trust God in all that you do? To pray to God, to reveal God's will in your life, and then to follow that will. And if you won't tell anyone, I will tell you, you know how I talk about you go through times of struggle. I am struggling to allow myself to follow God's will. I've come to a comfortable place in my life, and I know that God has more for me to do. And I know that I want to follow God's will. And I've actually had to been praying, God, help me to know your will and to follow it, and help me to want to know your will and to follow it. We have to struggle for that. Are we ready to pray for God to reveal God's will for our lives? Are we ready to pray for God to reveal God's will for our church? And if that means something different than what we're used to and what we're comfortable with, are we willing to follow where God leads us? Are we willing to trust God? You know, it's not always so easy to do. We may strive to let go of self. We may strive to let go of what our society teaches. We may strive to trust God, but we may find that we vacillate between trust and despair, between hope and petition, as this psalmist does in Psalm 31. Friends, as the psalmist says, our future really is in God's hand. And so my prayer is that we may, like this unknown psalmist who wrote Psalm 31, and like Jesus on the cross, find the strength and the trust in God so that we can entrust God with all that we have, so that we can turn to God as Jesus did and say, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Into your hands I entrust my very life, all of my life, and all that I am. Trust in God, my friends. God will never let you down. May God be with you as you trust him this week. And bye-bye.